If you want to motivate anyone, anytime, anywhere, whether they're a child or a teenager or adult, whether you're in the home or in the classroom or at work, and these are your employees, just think growls, GROWLS. And every one of these 6 human needs all work against the incentives, or should I say better, the incentives work against these needs.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Disrupt the Everyday. Today, we're joined by Dr. Rick Chromey. Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me there, Brian.
You're very welcome. And well, let's get started. We'll start at the beginning. Who is Rick Chromey?
Who is Rick? Well, Rick is a historian, a speaker, author, father, parent, grandparent. But I help people to interpret history, navigate culture, and explore faith. That's what I do and who I am.
Well, the one thing that you mentioned there is, again, being a parent, and that's the same stage of life that we're in. We have children who range from ages 5 to 12. There's 4 of them, and I guess one of the topics that really stuck out for me that you speak about is why kids misbehave, and I guess the real reasons for that, the root of that. So, I guess can we just kind of unpack that idea to begin with?
Well, first of all, misbehavior is a huge problem in a home, in a classroom, really wherever you go, you see misbehavior happening. And long time ago, and my kids are both out of the house and in their late 20s now. So I often say you're an expert on parenting when you have a 5-year-old. That's when you're the expert. And the older they get, the less of an expert you become. And eventually you just realize you're a complete ignorant on this thing and you just admit it. But, I got to tell you, as my kids have gotten older and how they've been raised and how they now interact and live and their own values and such, I think there's some ways that I can speak into that parenting perspective now, with some heart and with some hope. And I tell you what, if you got young kids, now's the time. You've got to learn these things now. Hopefully we'll get to how to motivate children naturally without bribery and gimmicks, because I got to tell you, and guilt, because when you use motivational strategies like that, you will lose every time. And so when it comes down to why kids misbehave, basically, there are a number of reasons. Obviously, environmental reasons can play a big part of this. If a kid's hungry, they're going to misbehave. If they're, obviously, if they have certain issues with, just life, they're going to misbehave. But there are 3 reasons I have noted over the years as far as why children, teenagers, and really adults misbehave as well. And the first one is belonging issues. We are not fitting in. I see this in the classroom a lot as a professor and teacher. I help teachers understand this, but I see it also in the home. When a kid is not feeling like they're fitting into the social context, they will misbehave. They will act up and act out at first to just get attention. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a waving of a flag. Hey, here I am. I exist. And it's just attention getting. And in fact, in a classroom, a lot of teachers have been taught to ignore this type of behavior. Oh, just ignore it. It'll go away. But I would suggest you don't ignore it. In fact, what you do is you learn how to interact with that. For me, as a teacher, even as a parent, it was just a matter of invading the personal space, just to let them know that I'm here. I see you. You matter to me. It's nothing more than moving in and maybe even just being within their personal space a little bit, or touching them on the shoulder, saying their name in a sentence. Those little things like that bring a child right back to you. Because if you ignore it, and a lot of parents do, they then move on to power plays. They now start to say, well, listen, let's just see who's more powerful here. And what happens is we as adults, we tend to power play right back. We use timeouts, for example, which I think is one of the reasons why we have problems. Timeouts are a very common parenting tool, but if the child is seeking to feel like they fit in and belong, is removing them to a space all by themselves going to solve that problem? And the answer to that is no, it's not. What we need to do is bring them back in. And by the way, I would say with children, young children in particular, 75 to 80% of misbehavior is in this belonging range. So, I tend to spend a little bit more time on it than the other reasons. But if all we do is power play, and that's what a lot of adults do, we just power play back in the educational environment. We power play back, often through grades. I'm going to flunk you if you don't get your business in, if you don't get it done. And that just moves them up to the next level, which is revenge. Basically, the power plays now become personal. You start to hear statements like, I hate you. I hate this place. I don't want to be here. I mean, those are all revenge statements. And eventually they turn into revenge behaviors where the child actually leaves home or says, I'm done. I'm out of here. Lock themselves in their room and then never comes out, that type of stuff. And in the end, if you power play enough, you can actually get them to the highest level, I think, of misbehavior. And that is where they just simply give in. They give in, they quit, they shut down. And like I said, they lock themselves in their room and say, fine, if this is going to be my life for the next 5 years, then I'm just going to stay in here and be who I am. And you guys can all live your life out there. And they distance themselves. And a lot of times parents at that point, and even educators, feel like, well, we've won. They're complying. At least they're not a problem anymore. Well, we've just created a problem for society at that point, because that child then moves out. And it doesn't matter, so belonging is a big part of this. And I always tell parents and educators, just focus on how do you reconnect? How do you create family? How do you create community and connection? And, how do you get kids to collaborate in the home? How do you get them working together? All those things create belonging. The second reason is simply boredom. They're bored. That's the reason why they misbehave. Dads out there listening, when you get in that car and you're taking that 20-hour trip to grandma's and you're not 5 minutes down the road and you hear the dreaded phrase, are we there yet? Yeah, that's what's going on. They're bored. And that's because children have the attention span of a gnat. No, they do. Their attention span is equal to their age. If you've got a 2-year-old, you got a 2-minute attention span. If you got a 5-year-old, you got a 5-minute attention span. If you have a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old or a 16-year-old, you have a 4-minute attention span. And that's because, and that's because of social media. What's happened in the last 10, 15 years is social media has redefined attention spans to be more micro. The average YouTube video is 4 minutes long. So kids are watching this micro media. They're on TikTok, they're on Snapchat, those type of things, micro media. And so it's very quick. Even you watch their television shows. I would say watch an old 1970s show like the Brady Bunch, for example. The camera will stay on a particular scene sometimes for a whole minute. They'll be in this scene. The camera, it'll just be one shot. You never see that today. Camera shots, everything's just moving so quickly. Look at video games. Everything's moving so quickly. It's why if you're over 50 like I am and you remember Pong, anybody, I imagine many in your audience don't remember Pong, but that was the original video game. And it was just 2 paddles, bloop, 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 bloop. And then along came Pac-Man, waka, 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 And then along came the one that destroyed it all, for me anyway, as an old guy, Super Mario Brothers. I would play Super Mario Brothers, and I would be 30 minutes or 30 seconds into the game, and boop, I'm dead. I'm going, what? Whoa, what did I do? That's when I gave up video games. But these kids, they are multi-visual. They see a lot of things happening at the same time, so they bore very easily. Which is why when you take a kid to Walmart or any other department store for 2 hours to go shopping, you're going to expect to have misbehavior. Which is where it's interesting, this conversation can go, is when you think about it, all these become very predictive. If you know there's going to be belonging issues, they're going to misbehave. If you know they're going to be bored, the boredom's going to happen. And the last one, this really is more for preteens and teenagers, but just beliefs. By the time you reach your preteens, age 10 or so, you pretty much start to adopt the beliefs that people have about you. I personally believe that I was a bad kid, because I was told I was a bad kid all my life. You're just a problem child. So I began to believe that. And when you start to believe that, you start to act down to that belief. You start to basically do what other people tell you are. You're not as smart, or you're not as pretty, or you're not as whatever. Those comparison games that go on. That's the angst of adolescence right there, is working through that. So belonging issues, boredom, and beliefs, what we believe about ourselves. That's what creates a lot of misbehavior, really most of the misbehavior that I see today.
So I guess, is it safe to say that, you mentioned all of those kind of other examples, like the environmental. So would these kind of be the buckets that those fall within?
Yeah, and they do. And when I talk, there's also physiological. I mean,
Right.
if you have a special needs child, let's be honest, that's a totally different game. I mean, than what we're talking about here. We're talking about the average kid who doesn't have, they have every child has special needs. Let's be honest, they have special needs. But if you're dealing with physiological special needs, that's a different horse altogether. But in general, if you've got a kid that's a kid and they're acting like that, these are the reasons. These are the three primary reasons. They may be hungry, but hunger actually deals a lot with belonging issues. They're not fitting into, their stomach is hungry and they just need to be fed, and they're coming to you because you're the caretaker. Yeah, it's a belonging issue.
Yeah, and I even think about not setting ourselves and kids up for misbehavior too, right? Yeah. So, it took a while, but now I'm even going to an example today. So the kids slept over at my mom's last night because there was PD day yesterday and today. And this morning she sent me a message because I picked them up early and she's like, do you need them ready for the day or can they just go as is? And I said, you know what? I'd rather them sleep if they're still sleeping and they can get ready when they get home. Why? To avoid an afternoon of potential misery for me, right? So it's also, it's also stopping and thinking, okay, I know the kids, I know that if they don't get enough sleep, there's going to be misbehavior, right? Or if I take them to a store and it's longer than a quick, basket of groceries, that's going to be a problem. So, I mean, we can also, not every situation we can avoid, but if there are some, why not avoid the kids being in those situations?
Oh, yeah. Well, forget the kids. Those shopping trips often are difficult for me. So
yeah,
I can only imagine a child.
Yeah.
Well, I watched a nanny. Remember Nanny 911?
Oh yeah.
Those are out there. Their go-to in the end was the timeout. And I watched one episode. I always said, watch those episodes through the lens of what I'm just talking to you about, and you'll have a totally different response. And I remember one meltdown this kid had at the department store, and Nanny Joe, whatever her name was, she just said, let's get the kid home. And they got the kid home, and all the kid wanted was a hug. He was just starving to have a connection with mom. And instead they put him in timeout, and they said, until you can behave in timeout. And that's what he did. He went right through all those steps, and he finally gave up, after an hour and a half in timeout. He finally said, enough. Okay, I'll behave. To get out. And then of course the answer is go over and give him a hug. And I'm saying that's what he wanted in the first place.
Right.
You don't have to go through the hour and a half of timeout,
Yeah. And sometimes too, it's that rationalization, right? For especially the younger ages, I find, because they do get into that tunnel vision of, geez, it could be anything. It could be from not getting the snack they want to something really extreme. And I even doing home daycare, right? I'm dealing with toddlers all day long. And it's so interesting to see how, like, one child, I could be like, okay, I'm going to ask you can you please give that toy back to your friend? They walk over with their head down, they give it back. Then the next one will just stand there and hold that toy and look at me and be like, what are you going to do about it? Right. Yeah. So it's very attitude. So even in just like being in a room full of pretty much the same age group. So then in a situation like that, okay, if you're not going to listen, that's when I would say you get a timeout. You have to sit down, and the whole, like you said, with the attention span, it's okay. You're 2 years old. You're going to sit out for 2 minutes. Right. But then you still sometimes have that child who's like, no, I'm not going to say sorry or do whatever in that moment. And it could be like, geez, I think if I would let it go, it would be like an all day situation because they're just so stubborn. They know what they want and that's fine. They don't want to back down. So sometimes it's like, okay, it is, I guess, a good personality to have, but then how do you navigate that in the times where, I guess you could say to them, conflict is high for a 2-year-old, right?
The problem you're having there, Tanya, is you are not their parent.
True.
You're the caretaker. You're the caregiver.
Yeah.
And that's by the way, that's interesting. It just hit me. You know how when you say something, you go, oh, that's an interesting thought. Some of us are caregivers and some of us are caretakers. Are you a taker or a giver here?
Yep.
And I think I'd rather be a giver. If I had to choose between the two, I'd rather be a caregiver than a caretaker. With that thought aside, part of the problem is that, and I think this is a huge context for those who are educators and caregivers like yourself, where you're tending other people's children, is they grow up in their own context, environmental context, as far as what they can do. If a child at home in particular home can jump all over the table and have fun, and the parents go, oh, hey, look at what little Johnny and Julie, and that little Juan there, boy, I tell you what, isn't that creative? He's on the table jumping. And of course, when they come to your wonderful little daycare and they start to do the same, you say, no, you can't do that, and they go, what? Make me, And in some ways, you see all discipline and how people act flow out of our family context. And that's what caregivers struggle with. That's what educators struggle with, because they have to deal with really poor parenting practices. And the problem with letting your kid dance on the table in your home, it may be cute and maybe something you think, well, hey, they're just being creative. Let them do it. Let them have some fun. But would you allow that in a public space? Would you allow that to happen at Dairy Queen, for example,
right,
or a restaurant? And of course, the answer is no. But I got to tell you, I've been out with some of those parents and how they're horrified at how their kids act in public. But it's because they taught them it was okay to do that at home, And wow, you get what you teach. So that's why I say start young. And I think it's fair to say that spanking should be a last resort. I love the proverb that comes from the Old Testament and talks about spare the rod. The idea of sparing the rod, spoil the child. Well, that's not even in the Bible, by the way. But what's interesting, it says you use the rod, and the rod is the rod of discipline. It's discipline, and it's not a negative thing. We think of the rod as being a punishing tool, but biblically, it comes out of a shepherd culture. The shepherd had a rod. It was about a 10-foot pole, and it was used to guide the sheep down the road. It was to keep them in line. It was to keep them going in the right direction. It was not meant to beat a sheep. Right. In fact, the proverb writer says you only beat when they're close to death. You're trying to save them from dying. At that point, then you beat the sheep to get their attention, basically to wake them up. The rod of discipline, biblically, is not punitive. It's productive. It's something that we use to produce productive, powerful, positive behavior. We guide and guard, not beat them with it.
Yeah, I know. It's so true, because even when it comes to having to talk with the kids about, behaviors and stuff, it's exhausting sometimes, right? As parents, because it's such a process that you have to go through, and it takes time, right? So then you have, if you're already frustrated, you don't have a lot of time. It's like, oh my goodness, you're just grounded from this for X amount of time. And if you're like me, sometimes it's not always the most reasonable grounding, right? It's like you're grounding for a week. And then I realize later, no, why would I have said that? Right.
And that's why we got to have this conversation, Tanya.
Yeah.
because it's sometimes what I just have to tell parents is dial it down.
Yeah.
Dial it down. Another little rule we had as parents that I think was, I look back and go, we did some things wrong. Let me be honest. We did some things wrong, and we corrected those as we went through. But there are a lot of things we did right. We had what we call the NBD rule. NBD, it means no big deal. No big deal. When I was a kid, I got grounded. You talk about getting grounded. I got grounded for 1 week because I spilled my milk. Accidentally spilled my milk. I got grounded for a week by my dad. That's the punishment didn't fit the crime.
Right.
I mean, and here's the thing, we're talking about 10 cents worth of milk at best, probably pennies when you think about how much milk costs at best with a kid spilling it. And we're going to ground them for a week. And the reason we do that, Tanya, is because we are reacting. And that's why I want to teach you why kids really misbehave. Because if you know why they're misbehaving, it's a belonging issue. It's a boredom issue. It's a belief issue they have about themselves. All those then become in your control to correct. You can actually change that future for that child, whether you're a caregiver or whether you're the parent of the child.
Interesting. I want to circle back there. You know, you mentioned spoil the rod, or spare the rod, spoil the child. I know it's not in the Bible. The closest thing I found is he that spareth the rod hateth his son. So really, if you're not disciplining properly, it's just really kind of showing contempt for your children. And obviously we don't want to do that either.
And that's what that proverb says. If you read, as far as, you hate your child if you don't discipline with the rod. But on the other side of it, the mirror of the proverb is that if you love a child, you will discipline them.
Mm-hmm.
And all I can say is that we have got this idea that the rod is punitive. Yeah. I would suggest that it's a last resort measure, even in the shepherd culture that it was being used. Shepherds all knew you didn't go around beating your sheep. In fact, the primary use of a rod was at night. They would take that rod, they would find a cave area, and they'd get their sheep all into this little cave area. And then the shepherd would put the big rod right in front as a gate, and then he would sleep in front of the gate. So the only way the sheep could get out or anything could get in was to go over him. Think about that. Are you protecting your child like that? Is that rod of discipline a guard? Is it a guide? Or do you only use the rod to beat your kids with it? Yeah. That's again, the idea of timeouts. I understand they're a very popular thing. I was just saying that if it's a belonging issue, timeouts are going to backfire for you every time. It's not going to work. Mm-hmm. It might fix boredom, I suppose, but with boredom, it's just a matter of changing up the scenery a little bit. And I don't know what that looks like on a 20-hour trip, by the way, Brian. I never figured that out. I got a bladder that's like an iron casket, so I can go for hours. My kids in the back going, please let us out. We were on a long road trip. Kids, I kid you not, we were on a long road trip somewhere in North Dakota, which if you've ever traveled North Dakota, I mean, it's just forever the same look. And we always took on this particular trip, we had a pet that we brought along, and we were living in Kentucky. So we found a Kentucky turtle to take along on our trip. So we had this turtle all the way on. It was our pet turtle for this particular trip, this family trip. And we get halfway across North Dakota. My son has written a sign saying, we're captives. We can't get out. And he's flashing this to truckers as we passed by. I'm going, oh, no. And it was all fun. We were having family fun. But I realized I needed to take more breaks at that point.
Yeah.
I was going to say, here's the thing. Maybe this is a great segue, though, because we talk about misbehavior. Let's move into how to motivate. Because I think if we have productive motivational strategy, that is also a big part of it. So let me ask you a question. How do you motivate your kids to do right and to be right and to live right and choose right? What are some of your tactics?
It's interesting when you say teaching how to motivate without on and on and on. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Do I even if it's not the bribery factor, right? It's okay. I'm just thinking you have to do this so that we can do this. So you are still getting something, and I'm not even talking about a toy. So we can get to the place you want to go, or we can get to the place that we're going as a family, right? There's, situations like that. Sometimes there is the motivation with bribes or items like, okay, you do this job, you get your money because that was a chore. And at the end of the week, you get your money, right? So there's so many different things, I guess that.
Yeah. So I guess, what you're saying is kind of helping them to see the bigger picture. The other thing, but I think it's in the moment, it is always a challenge, but I think the biggest thing is modeling the behaviors every day because they're always watching. So regardless of what you tell them, they're going to do what you do versus what you say anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what makes you great parents right there. You recognize that, your kids are chip off the old shoulder, off the old block. They're going to model what you have. Several years ago, I was thinking about this whole thing and I recognized fairly early, I was a youth pastor for a long time. And so, I thought, and back in the day, there was a very popular idea, still very popular, especially in the church culture, that, if you say your memory verse, you get a candy bar, or if you attend and you bring a friend, you get something else. And the whole idea was, let's make it fun.
Right.
Let's make it fun. And the gold star approach, and gold stars are fine, by the way, if they're being used to mark progress. Let's be honest. If you use it to mark progress, gold star to all your heart's content. If at the end of that if there's a certain point where you go, oh, if you reach this many gold stars, I'll take you out for pizza. It suddenly becomes a reward that's on the end of the gold stars. So the gold stars have a different meaning for the child. And the child is now focusing on getting the gold stars for the pizza, not because of the productive behavior that it's producing. And we see this all the time in our culture today, as far as the use of rewards as far as to produce behavior. I would suggest that instead of feeding that type of incentive strategy, because you're going to find it exhausting, you're going to find it temporary, and most of all, you're going to find it's counterproductive. In the end, the use of rewards demotivate, because the minute you take away that reward, suddenly the motivation for doing whatever you had them do goes down, not up.
I just want to say something on that for an example, or if the reward's not what they want. So one of the kids, every day I have to sign his agenda. And then I said, okay, get me your agenda so I can sign it. And he's like, I'm not worried about it. It's just a little chocolate bar anyways, if I get all the week signed. And I'm like, no, bud, no.
Yeah, he's saying the juice isn't worth the squeeze. No, I had a similar thing with my dad. You know what? He expressed to me that being good at school would help me be good at basketball. And the reason was, if I didn't have a certain grade, I wasn't allowed to play on the team. So, you know, it kind of went hand in hand.
Yeah. Well, and that's different. I mean, and I always say, if you're going to use a reward, if you're going to use an incentive, make sure that incentive is close to the behavior, you know. So if the incentive is you can't play on, or the consequence is you can't play on the basketball team because your grades aren't there, you know, that should be motivation in itself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you want to play basketball, so you got to have your grades. But I got to tell you, as a professor, I got a lot of college students came in, and they had been rewarded by money, you know, for their grades. Their parents have given them money. In fact, my son was telling me one time, he went to a pretty posh high school in the Boise area where we live. And he was telling me about one of his friends who got $100 for every A he brought home. And so, me being the very inquisitive, curious type, I said, so what did he get for a B? And he says, oh, he gets 0 for a B. And all of a sudden you see the problem.
Yeah.
Now you've set up perfection. The only way for you to get the money is to be perfect. Wow. You know, and that's actually a recipe for suicide, if you ask me, because and you didn't ask me, but I'm going to tell you anyway, it's a recipe for suicide. You know, if you can't hit perfection, if your reality is here and perfection's up here, that creates an angst there that you finally go, I'll never be perfect. And if it becomes that important to you, the drive becomes so important to you, you start to figure, well, I'll eliminate myself from the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I know what I would have done. I would have been very strategic about it. The classes where I had a B or less, I just wouldn't try in those classes. I would focus all my effort on those A classes to guarantee I'd get that $100 carrot at the end. But no, I guess going back to the basketball example, what made me think of that is you said, you know, it's tied to a reward. So, you know, obviously we had to have certain grades to play on an athletic team anyways, but my dad had a higher standard. But as soon as basketball season was over, my grades slowly slipped, right? Once that carrot wasn't there at the end.
Right. You were playing the grade. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, we've got this, I have to share with my millennial friends in particular, because the millennials were the ones that were really bribed and incentivized and everything in this whole thing in the 80s and 90s. As one who grew as a child of the 60s and 70s, let me tell you that I remember when a grade was satisfactory and unsatisfactory.
Mm-hmm.
You were either there, and sometimes if you did really well, they gave you an S+. That was the grade. You know, I didn't have letter grades until I got to high school. I have never been, well, I shouldn't say never. I was on the honor roll one time, I think in junior high. It was the B honor roll. I was on the B honor roll one time in junior high. I was never on an honor roll. I've never had an academic award. I finished my doctorate with a 3.98, you know, but they don't give academic rewards for doctors. They figure that award is in itself an award. But I never got the colors in my graduate work and my, you know, none of that. I never got to wear those. But you want to know something? You don't need that to be smart. You don't need that to be intelligent. You don't need that to be curious and to learn and to grow. You know, I've had none of that. I was a C+ student in high school. A lot of my teachers are to this day, their jaws drop when they say, you have a doctorate? Yeah. You know, I'm teaching them. It's okay. So, but you know, let me give a help to you and your listeners here.
Mm-hmm.
Because several years ago, I kind of realized that the reward trap wasn't working for me. And I started to study internal or intrinsic motivation. And there are some people out there that are fairly common. Abraham Maslow talks about the hierarchy of needs, internal needs that we carry. Another guy by the name of William Glasser in his control theory talks about, different needs. He talks about the power need and the love need and the fun need, those type of needs. And, those are all wonderful, but I was trying to think, how do I remember this? And even more, I was teaching it at a certain point to my students. I was trying to help my students to remember it. And you know what, Tanya and Brian, I was hungry. And inside of me, I realized, oh, something weird just happened. My stomach growled. And then it hit me. What if I could create an acronym around what I call the growls now? And so I've taught this for years. And if you could just wrap your mind around this acronym, everything falls into place here. If you want to motivate anyone, anytime, anywhere, whether they're a child or a teenager or adult, whether you're in the home or in the classroom or at work, and these are your employees, just think growls, GROWLS. And every one of these 6 human needs all work against the incentives, or should I say better, the incentives work against these needs. So if you're using incentives, you're actually not meeting these needs. The first one's pretty simple. G, grace. Grace. We have a deep spiritual need within us for grace. Grace is unconditional. Grace is unbelievable. Grace is surprise. That's why incentives don't work. If you do this, you get that. There's no surprise there, and you have to earn that.
Right.
Grace is unearnable. Grace just happens. Grace is affection and adoration and appreciation and applause, whether you did it right or not. It's acceptance, whether you did it right or not. It's approval, whether you did it right or not. And so grace is probably the hardest one to kind of wrap our minds around. There are just times we just have to show grace. My lovely son I keep talking about, one day my daughter ran into the house and she says, "Ryan's sucking on dog poop." He hates it when I tell this story, by the way. Ryan is sucking on dog poop. I said, "What?" And I ran out, and sure enough, my son is in the yard with a great big piece of fresh dog poop, and he is sucking on it. And I just, my first thought was, I'm going to kill this kid. Let's just take him out of my misery. But as I walked up to him, the spirit of grace started to fall on me, pity, forgiveness, and also the fact that, surely he's reaping his own consequence here, because this can't be a wonderful taste. So I asked him, he was all but 2 years old. I said, "Son, what are you doing?" And he says, "Tootsie."
Oh,
Tootsie.
gosh.
Oh. I said, "You think this is a Tootsie Roll?" He says, "Yes." I said, "Does it taste like a Tootsie Roll?" And he goes, "No." So at that point, I thought, that was the consequence right there. I could have just let it go. But instead, what I did was I wanted to show grace. And I said, first of all, this is dog poop, son. You don't want to be sucking on dog poop, and to his benefit and to his goodness, ever since, he's never sucked on dog poop again. I can tell you. But he put it down, and I cleaned it up. And I actually brushed my own teeth at that point, just because I felt like I needed it. And I then took him down to the grocery store or to the store, and I bought the biggest Tootsie Roll I could find. And I said, "This is what a Tootsie Roll looks like and tastes like. What you had out there is a fake replica that is not what you want." And it worked. And it was called grace. That's grace. The R, we've already talked about it quite a bit. Relationship. Mm-hmm. We have to connect. We have to, we all deep inside want to have be part of a community, be part of a place where we feel connection, where we can collaborate with other people, where we can share. The O is ownership. It's the idea that we're all control freaks at heart. Deep down, we all want to be large and in charge. We want to be the one stating and living and have. And so it's about choice. Can I choose here? It's about control. It's about contribution. The W is worth. Deep down inside of us, we have this innate desire to know, how do I really matter? Do I really matter here? Is this something that's Am I making a difference? So we have value, our vision. We have a vision that's honored. We have a voice that's heard. And if you just focus on those are what I call the power needs: grace, relationship, ownership, worth. GROW. What's that spell?
Grow.
Grow. Yeah, you'll grow your kids. Not just emotionally, not just in behavior, but you'll grow them spiritually. You'll grow them in how they interact with other people socially. The last two are what I call the primitive needs. They're the needs that we all have, and they're just so basic. But the L is laughter. We just love to have fun. Hopefully this podcast has been a fun podcast. It's been a fun conversation, and it should be, because hey, life is fun. You can't spell fundamental without starting with the word FUN. It's fundamental to life. Yeah. The S is security. Maslow talks a lot about security needs. This is where hunger, works in. Security. We need to feel safe. We need to feel secure physically, emotionally, spiritually again. And that's why we have to have no bully zones. We have to have a place where people and our kids can feel safe in every way. So those are the growls. And I'll guarantee you, if you focus on building environments that are safe and fun, if you focus on creating an environment of grace and community, relationship, empowering kids, and then giving them dignity, that's worth, giving them dignity for who they are, you won't need to use incentives. You won't need to use those other things, because they will be naturally attracted to what you're asking them to do. They will. And I built my home around these needs. I built my classrooms around these needs. I've used these. I'm a nonprofit president. I use it in motivating people today in every way. These needs work. These are the 6 human needs. And you focus on them. And you know why kids really misbehave? And you employ those needs at those times and the right need at the right time, man, you're going to be a happy parent.
Oh, no, that was great. And the one that stood out to me even more, I would say, is the ownership piece, right? Because let's take it back to the basics of chores. Or I think of my oldest, where I'll say, okay, did you get Samson the dog his food? Did you take him out? No, I don't want to do it. Well, I don't need to say to you, if you don't do this, you're going to have whatever taken away. I turned it into okay, you need to take care of him. Like, if this isn't on me, if you don't feed the dog, I'm not going to be starving, right? It's the dog that you wanted, and you don't want to obviously you don't want to cause harm. You want to make sure he gets his exercise. So you have to own that and take that. It's the same with the house, right? Like, this is our house. Take the ownership of helping to clean it up, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, just little things like that.
Do you have a problem getting your kids to clean up their rooms?
It depends. Not all of them.
Depends on the kid. Yeah.
Well, I got to tell you, first of all, when they're really little, they just can't do that. I mean, there's just they know how to take things out. They just don't know how to put things away. But if around kindergarten age and really through grade 6, their preteen years, those young childhood years, one of the things that we did was we called it the box, and it all employs choice. I'll give you a little idea here. First of all, we went in and we cleaned up both rooms to a T. I mean, they were perfectly cleaned up. We wanted them to see what we wanted to see at night. And we set a time. I think it was like 7:00. Your room needs to look like this. And then we had the box. And what we told them was, listen, if your room doesn't look like this, anything that's out will go into the box. Because obviously you don't know what to do with it. And we do. We'll put it in the box, and we'll just remove it and such. Well, what happened was, first night everything was good, but eventually we had to bring the box out. The whole thing was, if they then the next night cleaned up their room, they would be able to go back to the box and pick out something that was put in the box. So again, it rewarded them, but it was all consequential. And this wasn't an incentive or anything. It was just, if you do it right, there is reward. If you do it wrong, there is consequence. There's nothing wrong with teaching that. That's different than an incentive where you're baiting them. Another thing we used to do is on birthdays. And I think it started about grade or age 5 is when they had their birthday. We had what we called right and responsibility. We allowed them to choose a new right for their new year. Okay. And it might be something like, well, I want to stay up an extra 30 minutes. Okay. So what is the responsibility? Rights and responsibility. What will you do to have that right? And, I'll help mom with the dishes. Okay, there you go. Perfect. And we would negotiate that. Sometimes we negotiate, I want to stay up 3 more hours. I go, no, we think that's a little bit too much. How about we do an hour, So there was negotiations, but that happened on their birthday. We did it on their birthday. And that next year, then their new right went into effect and they had a new responsibility. We never paid them for the chores. My belief was that my job was to give them, if they needed clothes or anything like that, that I would take care of their basic needs. And with grace, a lot of times I would take care of their wants. My son wanted to play guitar and I bought him a guitar. He did not see that one coming. That's grace. So I didn't, if they wanted to earn extra money, eventually by the time they got to be teenagers, they wanted to earn the extra money. They wanted to kind of do some things on their own. They wanted to buy a car, for example. I said, well, hey, I can't afford to buy you a car, but you're old enough to go to work. If you want to do that, go to work. And both of them, they all went to work.
Interesting stuff. Now, I just want to do just because I know everybody has a different attention span. I just want to do a quick recap, and if you don't mind, fill me in where I miss things here. But again, we started off just talking about behaviors and the kind of motivation behind them. So again, summarize them in belonging, boredom, and beliefs.
You got it.
Looking at the discipline. So again, we follow the process. The process that you gave us is number 1, the warning. Number 2 is kind of that shot across the brow. Then we were talking about motivation, and we had the growls acronym to kind of break that down. Then you shared with us again the idea of the box, rights and responsibilities as well. So you're getting a 30-minute extension on how late you stay up, but there's an additional responsibility that comes with that. So just again, building into those kids and sharing their growth. And the other thing too was you mentioned fundamentals. You can't spell fundamental without fun. I think another thing too, if you're looking at getting financing for a venture, for example, you can say there's no fundamentals without the fund. So nothing without the FUND. So just if you want to steal that, feel free.
Yeah, I just might. That's actually pretty good. It's pretty good. I needed Brian to write me some new material today, and you did it.
There you go.
Wonderful. That's a meme for Facebook. I'll have to, it's what was it? Funds. You need the funds to be fundamental, or how'd you say it one more time? Let me make sure I get that.
Yeah, because you said there's no fundamentals without the FUN. So you could say there's no fundamental without the FUND.
Right. There you go. And the funds. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh man.
So I learned today. I love it when I learn something new. You got some more wisdom for me? Tanya, you got some wisdom for me?
Oh man. Brian likes to throw the wisdom out. I do too, but he's definitely quicker with it. That's for sure. Oh man. Just in wrapping up, you also have a book that doesn't have too much similarity to what we were talking about, but also so many great things going on right now. So you want to just enlighten us with that and what else you have going on?
Yeah, I wrote a book, came out just a year ago now, in the middle of COVID, no less. Great time to release a book. Great time to go on book tours and
gosh,
and yeah. So it's been interesting. But if you are interested in history, if you're interested in why generations act the way they do, why do we call boomers and Xers and millennials and Zers or whatever, and my book is for you. It's called GenTech. It's basically reimagining how we look at generations today. Instead of using these labels, these names and frames, a lot of times the frames are even wrong. It basically looks at us through the lens of technology that we come of age to. For example, I was born in 1963, and I came of age in the space race. I came of age in the cable television era. I came of age in the video game era as those were popping, because about your 10th birthday, there's always there's a technology that's popping. For my millennial friends, they came of age just as the personal computer, the cell phone, the internet was popping. And so those technologies frame who we really are. And it's a fun book. I'm getting some great reviews on it, but it is something totally different than what I've written about in the past. But I've become kind of a history hound here in the last few years, and have enjoyed helping people understand, maybe there's some different ways to look at who we really are, as opposed to being just boomers and millennials, or or my favorite Gen X and Gen Z. Talk about lazy labels. So, yeah, that's the book in a nutshell. Maybe I can come back sometime and explain that one to your
for
wonderful
sure.
listening audience, because it's a lot of fun to culturally take a trip down memory lane and talk about some of the technologies that influenced us and changed us and charged us really to be who we are.
Yeah, for sure. I'll have to add that to my reading list, and then we'll have you back on to unpack it for us.
Thank you.
How do we connect with you? What are the best ways to connect with you and just stay up to date with what you're doing?
Well, there are a number of ways you can do that. Obviously, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all those places. Feel free to follow me on that. You can also find me through rickchromey.com. That's my speaker author site. For those who are interested in my faith-based work, I have a nonprofit that I run where I help churches and schools and organizations, a lot of times smaller in size, because a lot of these organizations are smaller. I help them with leadership training and education training, parent training and such. And that's manasolutions.org. But rickchromey.com is a great place to connect with me. And I'd love to connect and, let's collaborate together. Let's tell our stories and make a journey of it.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Rick. This has been great. Definitely helpful. And especially that motivation factor. I like that growls.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.
Thank you.